Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here today at this meeting. As you know, we here would like to provide funds to students in order to promote inclusive excellence. So we are afraid that the traditional way of ranking the participants wasn't inclusive enough. So unfortunately, we have to say that we send them the original form to the applicants, so they filled it out. So we will have to deal with this for today. But what we wanted to ask you is to grade the applicants based on the initial grid at first, but then to suggest a new grid that will help us increase the inclusiveness of our process. So here's the grid that you will have to use.
I think it's a very good challenge, and actually, could you please provide us with a description of about inclusive excellence?
Sure, yeah, we think for us the inclusion idea to make people, make as many people feel included despite their differences, and especially designing a group vision. We also want to be equitable, so want to be fair and give everybody the chance to give everybody the same starting point, meaning equal chances, and we will like this process to achieve diversity in the selected grant receivers also.
Yeah, so first of all, our committee team are a diverse committee members come from different backgrounds. We are looking, we took training on unconscious bias, inclusive excellence, and ethics before we developed the new grade. And based on the formal training, we decided to anonymize the applications to avoid unconscious bias. And if one committee member was an expert in the subject of research of the applicant, then basically we'll do a pretty unbiased rating. And we had more than one committee member to assess each application. At the end of the rating, we reflected on the influence of our bias on our rating.
Great, thank you very much for this presentation. Can you now show us the grid? We're really excited about it.
Yes. So this is the new grid. So we have two parts to our grid. The first part is this part. Yeah, here. It's the excellence grid. It is divided in 4 parts. So the academic part, the personal part, the research project, and the communication skill. So we have a total for the whole excellence grid. So this is the first part. We're gonna dive into it a little bit later. And then the second part of our evaluation process is the EDI wheel factor. So this is a new part of the evaluation process, which will take into consideration the inclusive excellence. And it's based on the wheel of privileges and powers. So we will talk about this one a bit later as well.
Great. Could you please explain the difference between the 2 parts?
Yeah, so the first part it's essentially a bona fide version of the traditional grid that you provided us. We tried to make it more inclusive. For instance, the academic section, we decided to put less weight on it and put more weight on the personal side. Also, for instance, before we considered a lot the publication and the conferences, and now we decided to also consider other types of knowledge diffusion, such as workshops, mentorship, and grad teaching, which are more carried by women. So we also decided to take this into consideration. we also put a big part on community involvement and we added a section about art and sport, which was not included before. Do you have any questions about this grid?
Yeah, how did you make sure that we keep quality an important part of this grid?
So, as Tiffany said, we made it more inclusive by including more criteria and changing the weights. But also we made sure to include quality and excellence because differently from the wheel, the EDI factor, this one is where we assess the excellence, the quality of the work. So we still count for the academic participation. So not only the number of articles, but if you're a co-author, a first author, or the impact factor of the journal, but also the conferences you attend, if you're just a participant in the conference, if you run workshops, if you present papers, if you run posters. Also the scholarships, the level of scholarship, if it's institutional, if it's provincial or federal, the length of the scholarship as well, if it's a year or more. And also how you disseminate your knowledge. As Tiffany said, we didn't focus only on research papers, but also other more not so scientifically prestigious ways of disseminating knowledge, such as conferences, workshops, and mentorship, which, as she said, is usually carried by female and non-traditional researchers. And we also included excellence in terms of personal, so your community involvement, your work experience, and your research experience as well. So we were focusing on both the academic and personal excellence. And lastly, the research project, which is more future looking. So what are you proposing to do? Because the first two is the things past in your life, what you've done to this point. But we also wanted to focus on the excellent aspect in terms of the future. So what's your plan? What do you want to do? So that's where the research project comes in.
Does it answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really complete. So what is for the other part of the grid, what is the inspiration behind it?
So like I said, the inspiration behind the EDI wheel factor is this wheel, which is the wheel of privilege and power from the government of Canada. So it's a wheel of privilege and power. So if you're at the center, you have a lot of privilege and power, and the less you are from the center, the less privilege and power you have. So we took this wheel and we turned it into a grid, which is this grid that we call the EDI wheel factor. So we modified the initial wheel because there's some criteria that we could combine together and some criteria that we added. For instance, in the initial wheel of powers and privilege, there was no mention of the family situation. For instance, we added it because family the family situation could be a barrier to academic achievement. So in our grid based on the wheel, we took the factors that could be obstacles to academic achievement and we graded it out of 1. We had the total, which is the factor, and then we added it, and then we made a formula to assess the initial total of the excellence grid. So it's a factor that plays with the total of the excellence grid. So that's how we took the EDI factors into our new evaluation process.
Okay, great. So if I understand well, you put the wheel factor on top of the initial grid and you multiply it together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, with the
Great.
factor.
That's really interesting. I think this grid we find it good.
Yeah.
So we will let you go rate the applicants.
Thank you. We go
White
rate
ones
the
later.
applicant.
1 month later. Hi, again, we're here to present you our results. So here is the initial, here is the ranking using the initial form. And here are the other one. I will go there back. So here it's only using the first of our grid, and here is considering the EDE factor. Okay, so that what is interesting here is that from the initial form, we can see that there is a difference between our excellence grid that take into consideration some of inclusion. So we can see that the ranking is not the same. And that is what is more important and more interesting is that between our objective excellence ranking and between our ranking taking into account the EDI consideration, we can see that the ranking is also not the same. So just to give an example here and why we think that it is a good way and why we think that it works well, because is that if we take a look, for example, to Matilda, who is a mother who would take it care to her children and to her mother-in-law. So she take one place up. So in Louis Charles Degnaud with a white man student go down. So with that, we can see that we have assessed the inclusion of our ranking, and also that we can see it the three best if I can say the three best applicants are still the same. So it did not affect the quality of the ranking.
Just one last interesting thing about this is that our last ranking now that we explicitly take into consideration EDI, it's very similar to the original one, which was not explicit. So the difference between the initial grid and the last grid is just one position towards the end. But now we know that we are assessing. We know that we're being inclusive and diverse in our application process.
But we do have some suggestions for the future. So filling up the two grids, especially the one with the EDI.
No, so go back.
Yeah, just. Yeah. It's true, isn't it? All right. Especially to fill up this grid, we didn't have perfect information. We had to make some deductions given the forms that we received. And to address this, we kind of want to change the format. And so we want to propose, instead of filling out kind of long breath questions, to the participants would do a 5-minute video where we would have like a set of questions that they can answer in that video. The first one being, was there any of these elements that had that represented a challenge for you? So then they could they could detail their experience, and based on that we could give it a proper rating. So that would reduce the amount of assumptions. Also, another proposition is to ask, so in the videos the participants will also have the opportunity to like mention any extracurricular activities and detail their pathways. And yep, so that's future changes to make to the whole process.
And one last point.
Yep.
Just clarification. They have the option, if any of these topics are sensitive to them and they cannot speak in a video format, they have the option to submit a writing as well, a piece of writing where they explain this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Refresh.